Hello there, my name is Jonathan Friedman, and you are listening to 5 FAQs by EHN Canada. This is a show where we scour the internet for the most frequently asked questions about mental health and addiction and ask an expert for their answers to them. Today it is my honor and my pleasure to introduce my special guest, Patrick de Belen. Patrick is a Toronto-based Filipinx Canadian storyteller, arts educator, spoken word poet, writer, and filmmaker. His work, spanning poetry, film, and multidisciplinary projects, delves into themes of mental health, Filipino identity, liberation, community, grief, and healing. Renowned for his poetic collaborations with the Toronto Raptors, the NFL, CBC, and much, much more, Patrick has released 2 spoken word EPs and written/directed multiple cinepoems. He made history as the youngest poet to win a National Poetry Slam Championship, way to go, and has been honored with both the Canadian Poet of Honor and Youth Poet of Honor titles, along with several other storytelling accolades. Over the years, he has shared the stage with artists like The Roots, Shane Koichen, and the Haluchi Nation. His short documentary, Tell Me a Story About Someone You Miss, was a finalist in the 2023 TVO Short Doc Competition. He is currently in post-production for his debut feature documentary, Last Note, which is the recipient of the inaugural Kalaba bursary from the Real Asian Film Festival. Beyond his artistic work, Patrick is a dedicated educator and community builder, collaborating with schools, libraries, nonprofits, addiction centers, jails, and mental health organizations to champion diverse storytelling and create space for voices often unheard. Patrick, what a resume. How the heck are you doing today?
I'm good. If I knew that you were going to read the entire thing, I may have sent you a shorter version, but not that I don't mind.
I think it's worth telling. Yeah. That's awesome.
Thanks. I'm doing great, Jonathan. How are you?
Everything is good. I feel like I've known you for probably close to a decade now, and I didn't even know some of these fun facts.
Yeah, because we've been mostly friends, and so I don't bring my resume.
You don't lead with your bio, with your professional bio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I love that. Well, we're really, really happy to have you on the show today. And as you know, today we're going to be diving into the internet's biggest questions about mental health as an artist. And for all the listeners out there, today is less coming from a clinical perspective and more about lived experience. As we mentioned, Patrick is a community builder. He's had a lot of experience in mentoring and working in the creative space. So that's where we're coming from today. And if you're listening and you're on Spotify and you're able to leave a comment below to let us know what you think, we're excited to have that. So we're going to get down to the nitty gritty. And our first question from all of the scouring of the internet we did was,
let's do it.
Let's do it. How does mental health impact creativity?
See, this is what happens when there isn't prepared answers, is that there's going to be moments where I think about it. I think, how does it affect creativity? I guess for me, they're parallel to each other. They're connected. I think they're relatively the same. I guess they're just so deeply connected. I think when I started writing, it was, an activity that my dad shared to me. And I think it was growing up, in the neighborhood that I grew up in at the time that we did with our economic background, mental health services were not accessible for many different reasons. And I think because of that, a lot of people in my neighborhood, including me, kind of gravitated to more accessible means of coping with mental illness. And I think for me, it was art, and it was storytelling. And so I think what even drew me to creating art was, navigating my mental health. And so, yeah, I think its impact is, great. It's huge. And even now, it's still kind of my main method of navigating my mental health. And so they're deeply related, not always in a positive sense. I don't think that it's always this kind of mental health and the struggles I experience in that now inspires work. I think there are maybe more difficult parts of that relationship between mental health and creativity. But for the most part, it's really hard for me to distinguish the difference because, art is expression, and usually that involves things I'm experiencing and that's going on in my head. And so they're deeply related. Sure.
So really appreciate you sharing that, Patrick. Walk me through the process a bit. This isn't one of the questions. I'm just curious, but
Yeah.
like maybe a big life event happens, or you've had a rough day, or maybe you've had a really great day where you're processing something. How do you take that and, in your case, bring it to paper or bring it to something that you're bringing to an EP? What does that look like?
Yeah. Uh, you, you feel something. It doesn't even have to be something specific in a day. It could just be something that you've been dealing with your whole life and have looking for different outlets or, I guess like compartmentalizing a portion of that experience to then talk about it. And so, like for example, let's talk about a poem I wrote called Fear, right, which is on one of my EPs. And it's a list of fears. And a lot of it in that poem, I talk about, suicidal ideation, depression, a lot of other different mental health struggles that I experience. And so a lot of the time it starts very messy, which I kind of like. I just need to, a blank canvas and a space to play and a space to like just kind of dig and vomit. And there really a lot. There isn't any structure to it. That could look like me just going to a paper and just journaling, train of thought, and then that goes on for as long as it needs to. And then finally, I have notebooks full of ramblings about something, and then from there, I take a lot of space away from it, and then I come back to it with a different hat on, and that one becomes more of my like, my creative, artistic skills and literary skills, and then I rearrange everything. So now I have all of the kind of like meat that I need to make this recipe, and then or all these ingredients, I guess, and then I cook, and then I cook.
I love that.
Yeah, I actually do this. I have this like a thing called like I do my workshops called the anatomy of a story, and it involves a recipe that I've made up in different parts of whatever. But yeah, so it starts off that, and then after that, I go in and start to structure things with different literary devices and processes, and the hero's journey or whatever the classic kind of storytelling philosophies and structures that exist, and I put it together into something that like is a little bit more succinct and something that I like. And then once it's done, I add a little spice and flavor and a little bit of me into it, and then that's it. That's the piece, and then I memorize it, and then it becomes part of my body, and then an extension of me, and then yeah, the relationship evolves from there. And I like to look at everything I make as like, I don't know, like different relationships that I have. And so like some poems are like things that I date once, and then I'm like, all right, later, that didn't work out. And then there are ones that I marry, and ones that are just like part of me, and that I do forever. And then that changes too. Marriages end, so I feel like it still changes, but that's kind of what the process looks like. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think it's really interesting. And I know here we've done some webinars with creative therapists, like art therapists. We're about to do a podcast episode as well with a music therapist. And there is this space that we hold for like that self-expression piece. But then in your career, you have to go back to that self-expressive vomit, as you called it, and put on your editing creative hat and say, okay, like, does this make a song? Does this make a poem? What poem does that fit in with my other collections? Does that fit into this doc? In what way does it fit into it? So on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. But I think like without that open space to play and to just, to express and just let go, that needs to be first for me. I think that I never approach a piece with too much structure, or even an idea of what it's going to be. A lot of the time it's just like feeling based, and then it kind of starts to make sense from there.
Love that. Thank you for sharing that. Moving over to more of the performance side of things. I imagine, like, I know for myself as an artist, and even when I'm presenting here, but when you're getting up on stage, I imagine there's some level of so-called performance anxiety that comes up. What strategies do you use or share with other artists that you've worked with to cope with performance anxiety?
Hmm. I mean, a lot, right? I mean, I am an art educator, so that's a lot of what I do. There's like a process that I have and you know, like a whole series of workshops I have towards performance. But I think, um, you know, there's a few things. I used to teach public speaking at a private school, and which is like a whole other thing. Like I would
Yeah.
never, it's like Toastmasters,
Yeah.
but like for Patrick, which was very different than Toastmasters. But I think the first thing, and I think the most important thing is to understand that speaking in front of a group of people or performing in front of a group of people is literally the scariest thing to do. You know, like I think at one point it was the number one fear in North America. I don't think that's still the thing, but, and then number two is death. So I always bring that up in my workshops is that like people are more scared of performing and speaking in public than they are of dying. And so this whole thing is like, I think it's important for me to remind myself every time that what I'm doing is brave. And I think that is the key kind of element to any performance is bravery. And that's maybe an intangible, but I think, you know, just remembering and honoring that you are doing a brave act is really helpful in finding the kind of motivation to bring you to the stage. So yeah, number one is just reminding yourself that it's brave what you're doing. Like some of the best poetry performances I have ever seen have been, some of them have been really crappy poems. But that wasn't the point, right? It was this young person who's never, you know, spoken public before, going up in front of thousands of people and talking about the most vulnerable parts of their life and themselves. And that was so brave that audiences would be like, you know, on their feet and rushing towards the stage to embrace this person. And that experience is like, you know, so memorable. And a lot of it didn't have to do with any technique. It was just bravery and honesty. And so that's first. And then, of course, breath. I think that's just so important. I think when people get anxious like me, I just forget to breathe properly. And I think people just forget that. I think people just forget how to breathe. Like, I think it's just like a, you know, like you think you know how to do it. And I feel like a lot of people don't know how to do it, including me sometimes. Um, and so it is breath. But, yeah, so breath, bravery, and I think those are the main things I would say to people. And then, you know, there's the other classic stuff, right? There's the eye contact and the taking a second in front of, you know, in the washroom to do your like 8 mile and like put water on your face and like, you know, get yourself, you know what I mean? So
Talk a lot about spaghetti.
yeah. Exactly. So, but honestly, it is an intangible thing for me because it's sacred, and I don't think that there are a lot of techniques that could be like, you know, talked about and ways to break it down. But I think it is a sacred experience, performing poetry in front of people, and a lot of that has more to do with my spirit and less to do with technique.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And what I find interesting is, and one of the reasons I wanted to start including more people who are not necessarily clinicians is a lot of the things that they do to be great at the things they do are actually clinical. Like we had recently, I guess, on the show, Dr. Amanda Taube, who's here in Toronto as well. And a big piece of her work as a clinical and organizational psychologist is working with professionals on public speaking anxiety. And a big part of our conversation, and I really put her on the spot, I made her therapize me in the moment, was talking, because I struggle with social anxiety, and talking through the whole piece of literally forgetting to breathe. Um, and I was like, wow, like there have been so many times where I'll be up on stage as an artist, but also as a professional, and I'll start like having the tunnel vision. And I have Tourette's as well, and my tics will start really going off, and I start sweating through my third shirt of the day. And it's like, wait, in that moment, if you told me to just breathe, I'd be like, come on.
Yeah,
But
like get out of my face.
if
Yeah.
I practice the breathing ahead of time, and get into that rhythm of things, there's actually science to back up that will help. And not only with that, but you'll feel more calm and probably able to be more yourself when you are presenting or performing. Which is
Absolutely.
what you want to see. You can really let that bravery shine through there.
And that's why, and I think that an extra thing I would mention is like, for me, like community is huge for feeling comfortable. And so oftentimes if I'm performing in a space where I may know someone or have a connection with someone, hearing them from the audience, really gives me a little bit of, like, it calms me down a little bit. And so, which is also to say that, like, for me, the first time I get audience reaction, my nerves immediately drop by like 50%. The moment someone interacts with me and says that they feel me, and so in poetry, that's kind of like finger snapping or clapping or whatever. I'm like, I feel a lot better. And so it's really just those first few seconds of dead air before things start actually happening. That's the scariest part.
Yeah.
So I try to put enough like audience interactive like things in my sets to right off the bat, just to get that first laugh or snap or gasp or whatever, just to be like, okay, they're in the room with me. And, yeah. And, like, I don't mean to not be too, you could break it down to a science. And I think you can. I think you should. But, yeah, I think when I say that I'm there in my spirit and connecting to like my ancestral whatever, you can call that meditation, you can call that whatever. But I think it can totally be broken down to a science. Yeah.
And that's what that means for you. And I wasn't saying that you should replace the spirit with the science. It's more like interesting how there's sort of this natural want to not feel that way, right? And psychology is actually like a fairly new field in the way we're trying to understand all of these different things about ourselves, and how all of these systems work. But really, like when you're performing, when you're up there, you seek to feel good and you seek to feel connected. And here you're saying, oh, well, actually, there are some tools I actually put into place right away to get that first gasp, to get that first little bit of connection, because that's what my poetry is about. It's about connecting with the audience and my people.
Exactly.
It's a really good segue into our next question, which is, what role does community play in an artist's mental health? So it could be on stage, but also off stage.
Huge. Yeah, these are big questions. These are like, no, I know these are like big overarching questions. And so there's like a million different ways to answer them. I will say that personally, oftentimes when you start becoming an artist, at least for me, you really kind of just want to share stuff. You're like, I wrote things that mean a lot to me and I want to share things. And then you look for those opportunities to do that. And then once you do, you start to meet a lot of people, with like-minded experiences and like-minded people with similar experiences to you. And, then, and especially inherently to me, art is political. And I think that, when you're writing about your environment and yourself, and then you're around environments where other people are writing about their environment and themselves, you start to like organically find yourself in this place where you're kind of advocating for something. And I think that when you find that community of people who are doing that, it becomes important to you. It becomes something that you want to protect. And a lot of these communities, especially in art, exist outside of our institutions. And it's kind of also there's a connection to this idea that our institutions and these structures that already exist are actually built to work against the mental health of, a general person. And so these communities then are a response to those. They're like, oh, let us carve new spaces for us to, be safe and to be, to have mental health struggles and that not be considered weakness or vulnerability, but rather a strength. And I think, so yeah, community, for me, it's a long-winded answer to just say that community is a place where I can feel comfortable to explore, to be safe, but not always just safe. I think in reality, not many places that say they're safe aren't the safest, but I think to be brave too, you know?
Mhm.
And so yeah, community and mental health is very important, especially in, when considering, art and the industry of art, or at least not the industry, the community of art. Those things are also really important. Yeah.
I love that. And even in like, interestingly, in therapy, in inpatient or outpatient treatment too, like one of the things that clinicians are immediately going to ask for at the beginning is like, what communities are you involved in? Because when you're in therapy, when you're in that place, yes, we're able to create a space. And by we, I'm not a therapist, but like the therapists of the world are able to create that space where you're able to work on those things and go through those challenges. But that might be 1 hour, 9 hours, or a 40-day period at a time. What's going on outside of that? What are the systems that are in place to help somebody feel connected to themselves, um, and to community? And I think, like, as an artist myself too, I think it's always been a natural thing that I gravitate towards. Like, at first you're 15, 16, listening to people screaming because you found it on LimeWire and you're like, this is interesting, but I'm the only one. And then suddenly you find your people, and then you're able to either form art with more people who have similar or complementary taste to you, but also be around so many fantastic people who are there to support and love and care for you too. It's a big piece of it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And again, like, as a community builder myself, like, I mean, that's not to say that these places aren't full of people who annoy the shit out of me, like, and I think that's like an important thing to like be reminded by. This is not some like utopian concept. I think that, like, like, it's not some like, oh, because it's not, an institution or something that, prioritizes, numbers and profit over people. It doesn't mean that it doesn't come with its own obstacles and like disagreement and, even worse. But I think, but yeah, I think there's just that like common understanding that we're all here and human, and, doing something brave, like sharing art, or doing something honorable, like consuming it. And, I think that's important for anyone, but also for those people who are navigating mental health struggles too.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, on that, how do we feel engaging in art? So, not necessarily being the artist, but being a consumer of art. How do we feel that that can improve mental well being?
Um, well, I think, and I feel like anyone would kind of land on this, but I think that when you experience art and you consume it, especially storytelling, like, I feel like, as that's something more specifically that I do, but it's it's a practice in empathy. It's like you're actively being offered a feeling and a new perspective, and it encourages you to find its, connection to your life, and a meaning to you. And I think that kind of, you know, journey of figuring out what this means to me and what this means to the person who created it, naturally intersects with intersects with mental health. And, you're actively empathizing with this person's mind and life experience. And so I think it's so important. I think it's so important. I think that, like, my favorite artists, make art that challenge people or that offer something different, but it also is talking about mental health struggles, and in many different ways, whether it's like grief or just sadness or like anger. And like, there's mental health is kind of embedded in all of that. And when people consume it, sure, many people just kind of bop their head to something and they're just like, oh, this is cool. But I think most people are in some way letting that permeate, and therefore practicing empathy, which is important. Yeah.
That our last question for today, it's second last question, but our official last question is: how do you feel artists can balance their creative pursuits with self care?
Hmm. I mean, that's hard. I think my main answer would be to dismantle the capitalist system that we live under, to therefore offer more opportunities for artists to create art sustainably with like a fair wage and a livable wage. And so that's like the general kind of thing. I think artists are, um, I think it sucks that the responsibility of artists to take care of themselves solely lies on them in the landscape that we live in. I think that's kind of terrible, but at the end of the day, realistically, we have to exist under this system and therefore survive and even thrive under it or in spite of it or whatever. And so I would say in terms of what I can control, as an artist, it would be, to take breaks, to, try not to measure the success of my art based on, standards, that kind of like are pushed on me by the society we live in. So like to be more clear about that, like for instance, like, I don't know, like if you measure your art based on views or listens or whatever, that could be really exhausting, or even money, right? Like, or awards or accolades. I think that could be really exhausting. And so just to remind yourself that you create art for a deeper reason and meaning beyond these kind of traditional measurements of success. So I think that really does help me. The main thing that helps me is to be like, oh, why am I doing this? Why am I creating this specific piece? And to remember that when kind of feeling burnt out. And so that's really good for self-care. But yeah, also just go for walks, do things that make you happy. And your art is important, but it's not the most important thing in the world. And you are more than your art. And yeah.
Love that. You're talking about cooking before, and I think it is easy to get lost in the sauce, right? Like if you're in a band and you're on Spotify and you're like, how many monthly followers on Spotify or listeners do I have? Oh, we worked hard on putting this music video together or sharing the story, and it only got 120 views on TikTok. What matters more is that, one, you tried. Two, you were brave to share your art with the world. Three, it's just TikTok. Before, like, they're just numbers. Like, that doesn't equal, from a success point of view, people coming to your show. It may not equal how you feel about your art. It may not equal like all of those other things. So I totally agree. You're more than your art. It's important to take a step back and sort of check in.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. You are more than your art. Yeah. Hell yeah.
Patrick, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. If you were to give someone just a little piece of advice to start their own journey with their mental health, what would you tell them?
What would I tell someone who's starting their own journey in mental health? I would say be brave and give yourself grace.
Love that. Recovery is possible. EHN Canada is the place for both virtual and inpatient treatment programs for mental health and addiction. To learn more about the work we do, go to ehnccanada.com. If you're interested to learn more about Patrick and his journey, Patrick, where can they find you?
Social media at Patrick_DEBELEN, the Belen. Or you can just look me up anywhere else. I'm pretty easy to find.
Fantastic. Patrick, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.